What's going on, guys? Today we're going to talk about the trigger assembly on the Hawk. We're going to go through a disassembly so that we can gain access to the trigger and I can show you how to adjust it. We want to make sure that the rifle is degassed, and also we want to remove the tank from the PCP. I have already removed certain screws in this just to make it easier for the video, but I'm going to point out the screws that you need to remove so that you understand what has to happen. There's a long screw that goes from the other side, from the opposite side, comes through here. Take that out. Take out the Allen head screw on this side. There'll be one like it on the other side, and you just want to loosen these Allen heads slightly just so that the two clamshells get loose. Remove the Allen head that's inside here where this is going through at the bottom, and that'll allow this cover that's sitting on the end to be loose enough so that you can remove it off the end of the pressure tube and off the bottle drop. The way that the clamshell opens with those two loose on the top and the bottom allows this to come off, and we're just going to put that to the side. At this point, we have our safety has one fastener that comes up through the bottom of the safety tab. We're going to remove that one Phillips head. It's very, very small. That allows us to get the plastic switch off so that this blade will go through the wood opening. At the bottom there's another Phillips screw which holds the action into the stock. We're going to go ahead and remove that Phillips screw. At this point the action is loose and can come out. At this point though, I'd like to just double check to make sure that we're not cocked, making sure we're not hitting the trigger, so we're disengaging to make sure that there's no tension on anything, that it's completely unloaded and ready to go as just one last safety. At this point, now that this is removed, we slide it forward so we're aligned with the opening, and we can push our action up and out. We can get the wood out of the way. The focus of this video is going to be on the trigger assembly, and as I said, I already took fasteners out, so if you notice, these two fasteners are already removed. And what it is this going to open up this door so we can see inside the trigger. You really do not need to go inside here. I'm only doing this for illustration purposes so you can see the internal working. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so we get more of a detailed look inside the trigger. Okay, now we've got a close-up look at the trigger so we can see that this is the tongue that would be fire and safety that would go back and forth. This is our actual trigger itself. And you can see that in this trigger we've got a first stage, which is that little bit of movement before the second stage goes to move. I'm going to open this trigger up so that you can see inside. You may notice that there's a pin here, here, and here. When you open the case of this, if you ever had to go in here, you got to keep an eye on those pins. Make sure you don't pull them out because the inside will come apart and it'll be hard for you to determine where the pieces go. That's the slide for the safety, which slides back and forth. So here's our internal workings. We have an adjustment on the top, which will be a flat blade screwdriver that comes in from the rear. As that's screwed in, that is the amount of a second stage that we'll have. We're going to go through that right now. This bottom screw, which is an Allen head, is how much tension or load that we put on for that second stage to move. If the further we go out, the easier it is. The more we go in, the harder and the more pounds it will take to disengage the sear. As the hammer pulls back, it engages the sear, and then we have which is known as the Sear Interface or overlap that'll be here. For the conversation here, I'm just going to take the safety slide out just so it's not in our way, so that you get a better view of what's going on here. As the hammer comes back, it engages the top of the pawl and it turns this so that these two interface. And you'll see as I pull this back, it's engaged. Now these two touch each other. Now remember, there's an upper case that holds this pin in the proper position. Without it, it does a little bit of rocking that you see there. That wouldn't happen under normal circumstances, but again, for illustration purposes, I just want you to see the mechanics. This spring that's on top, note how it comes around and pushes on the small pawl. That's so when the trigger comes apart, that forces it to go back. It snaps back so that the trigger can come up and be ready for the next time the hammer comes back to put some pressure on it. So that's how the trigger itself works. Let's talk a little bit about adjustments on this trigger. There is no first stage adjustment whatsoever. The amount of first stage that we have there, that little bit of movement before you see this piece move, I want you to watch it. So keep your eye right here and see when that moves. I'm going to put this against it so you can get a good idea when that's first stage right there. Second stage is right there. So this lower one is how hard will it be before second stage starts to move. The upper one is how much sear engagement we have. As we start screwing that in, we make it less and less engagement. Obviously, when you start getting towards an area like this, you end up with a very dangerous trigger, because if the rifle were ever dropped, they would come apart, releasing the hammer, and the rifle would fire. It's a very simplistic trigger, but that's how you would adjust it to get it to where you want. Remember, first stage, there is no adjustment. That's all you have, and you can adjust how much preload and sear engagement. Very simple trigger. We don't need to go about putting it back together again. I think it's self-explanatory. The safety, just so you understand how that works, it is literally just an interference blade that, when it's forward, keeps it from coming down. Trigger keeps the sear interface, keeps it engaged, won't let it come down. When it's slid back, the tab goes into the void, allowing the trigger to come down, allowing at that point the sear to slide past each other. A very simplistic trigger. A couple of pointers that I just want to point out to folks that were having some issues. Some folks have actually taken out these two screws that hold the trigger group onto the bottom of the pressure tube. It's important that you know that if you loosen these two screws, I'm going to show you, I'm just going to loosen them slightly. Keep an eye on how much this trigger can move back and forward, okay? Because that movement back and forward can be the difference between the hammer engaging and it not. If you ever take this trigger group off, make sure that you keep the hammer held back so that you know that you're not binding it up, and you also want your trigger group as far forward as you can go. This whole group shouldn't be back like this, it should be far forward like this, because if you don't, it won't engage. I'll give an example. I'll push it all the way back like that. I'm just going to snug up this for a second. Essentially what we've just done is we've taken the engagement surface and we've moved it rearward. So now when the hammer comes back, it's never going to be able to engage. So if you find that happens, chances are what's happened is, if this was put back in, it needs to be pushed forward, all the way forward, and then tighten it back up again. Now we'll do the same pull back. Notice it's engaged, and that's it. Again, I don't like doing it without the top cover on, because this does add a certain amount of rigidity of supporting those pins when it goes back on, and we have a complete assembly for the trigger assembly itself. So that's the Hawk's trigger assembly, final adjustments and so forth. Hopefully you find this useful. Thank you.